I think it's going to be a special event today. I'm sure it's going to be a special event today. So today we're discussing issues of anti-Semitism and Africa. Unfortunately, Professor Femi or Olufemi Vaughan from Stony Brook will not be able to be here. Unfortunately, he actually, it's sad for us, but it's good for him. He was just offered actually an endowed professorship at a famous university in the Northeast, so he's going there today to sort out his business. They're actually hiring, he's going to be the professor of a new African Studies department at Bowdoin College in Maine. So he's there for good reasons, but unfortunately he cannot be here. But we have two very distinguished and prominent professors and speakers with us today. And it's really a great pleasure to be able to host them. And I think it's very important as well. I'll sort of put this in a very brief, concise context. In the work that I do, at least, issues of anti-Semitism, contemporary anti-Semitism, I argue, although there's a debate to this, is changing as the world is changing. We're entering into a processes connected to globalization, and processes of globalization are transforming society on all sorts of levels, at an economic level, at a political level, social levels, and cultural levels. And the role of trade, the role of government, of the state, are transforming. They're changing, and they're changing rapidly. And I think it's very important for us to understand that as the world is changing and processes of globalization are transforming societies and affecting our lives in the so-called first world and in the so-called third world, it's, to me, bizarre concepts of there's first worlds and third worlds and fourth worlds. It's one world. But in the center and in the periphery, things are changing. And we can see, in a sense, an expansion of connections between and among peoples. 20 or 30 years ago, the amount of trade, the amount of migration, the amount of travel, the amount of telecommunications, compared to where we are today, are extremely different. So through globalization, people and capital are moving at expanding rates. And yet at the same time, people are becoming more and more marginalized and more segregated and are falling out of the formal economic and social and cultural and political systems. And as the world changes, I'm arguing, anyways, that anti-Semitism is also changing. And the place of the Jews and the place of the State of Israel is also entering into a different phase. And I think because of these changes, it's very important to understand how the world is changing, and within that context, how issues of anti-Semitism is also changing. And these changes are not just taking place in England and France and in Germany and in the Middle East and Iran, which we hear about and read about. People who follow anti-Semitism are obviously for good reason concerned about, but the changes are also taking place in parts of the world that are often overlooked. And I think, unfortunately, I must say, I know you're supposed to be positive when you're hosting symposiums and seminars, but I think that the turnout and the interest, unfortunately, in peripheral places to the center, like Africa, is often an overlooked place, but it's also an extraordinarily important and an extraordinarily rich place at all sorts of levels. And I think today we're lucky, and we have a special occasion just to get a taste of what's going on in the African context vis-a-vis issues, contemporary issues of anti-Semitism in this new transforming globalized world. So the first speaker will be Hubert or Shalem? Hubert? Okay, so I'm going to introduce both speakers and I'll sort of act as an informal discussant. We're a small group. What I would like to do is we'll have the two talks. When Hubert is finished, if anybody has any sort of what we used to call points of clarification, if there's something that's not clear in Hubert's paper, please feel free when he's finished speaking to ask him just to clarify something, but we won't get into an in-depth discussion with Hubert. And then Shalem will come and speak, and when they're both finished, we can have a discussion and a debate as you wish. So I'm first very happy and honored to introduce Shalem Coulibaly. I met Shalem in Israel, in Jerusalem, in the Shuk Machane Yehuda 15 years ago. He's originally from Côte d'Ivoire, from Abidjan, and After completing his traditional rites of passage, or his initiation in Ivory Coast, he went on to do a first degree at Abidjan University in Côte d'Ivoire, in the center of Côte d'Ivoire, the capital. And then he went on to study philosophy in Europe, in France, with Emmanuel Levinas, who is one of the most renowned and I think important thinkers and Talmudic commentators and philosophers of the last century. He then, Shalem went on to study at the University of Poitiers, where he received a Master's of Philosophy. He then went to the Sorbonne in Paris for a doctorate degree in philosophy, and later did a management and business degree at the European Institute of Management and Finance in France. He was a professor of philosophy at Tel Aviv University and at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and he also was a professor in the Academy of Arts at Hebrew University, where he taught African philosophy and African art. He's returned to Africa, where he's at the university in Burkina Faso, the University of Ouagadougou, where he's teaching philosophy and management. Today, Shalem, who will speak second, is going to speak. The title of his talk is called Negation of Memory, Jewish and African Responses to the New Antisemitism and Racism. To his right, and also an old friend and colleague, Hubert Ngatcha Njila, is originally from Cameroon in West Africa. He was here at Yale for many years, and this is where we met originally. He holds a master's degree in economics and finance from the University of Pierre Mendès in France, in Grenoble. He has a master's degree in political sociology from the Sorbonne University, and a PhD in North American Studies and Political Science from École des Hautes Études et Sciences Sociales in Paris. From 1998 to 2004, he was a teaching assistant and a PhD candidate in a joint French-Yale University PhD program. So he was here at Yale University, based in the political science department. While he was at Yale, he also served as the executive director of the Center for Race and for the Study of Race Inequality and Politics. He was the coordinator for the Sangha River program here at Yale, and a postdoctoral fellow at the Gilman-Lerman Center for the Study of Slavery, Resistance, and Abolition at Yale. Professor Ngatcha studies North American institutions and political history and how racial identity influences public policy. Today, Hubert will take his expertise and look at how the 9/11 attack on the United States was perceived in Africa in terms of its relation to anti-Semitism. So it's really an honor, and I'm happy to introduce Hubert to you now.
Thank you, Professor Small. I'd like to thank him to invite me here back in town after 4 years. I left 2004, and I'm happy to be here. When I came back, I was so excited because I spent 6 years in this town that I studied New Haven politics, actually. So be back here is be back home. Thank you for being here, all of you. And I want you first to forgive my accent and also my poor English. I lost my English, to be honest with you. Back to Paris, I had to go back to my French in the academic perspective. That means how we use French in the academic university. And then I forget all my English. I'd like you to be very, 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 not very, very hard on me if I do any mistake or my accent is not so very good. I want to ask you a question before I get started. How many here have read and heard about anti-Semitism in Africa? How many of you? You heard about it? Okay, 1, 2, 3. So in this room, just 3 people. It's very interesting. So we're going to move this discussion further. I'm asking the question because in my research, to find the sources to locate the information about anti-Semitism in Africa was very difficult. I mean by that anti-Semitism in the sub-Saharan Africa. Then you raise your fingers, but I don't know if you mean by that the sub-Saharan Africa. So I didn't find information, and I'll be happy to hear about that. What I heard about was information on the Islamist group perpetrating terrorism in African soil. Mainly in when I speak about, I mean by that in the sub-Saharan Africa, such as Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, mainly. I don't want to mention the North African countries such as Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt. They are different from sub-Saharan Africa. This need a specific study if we want to discuss about the North African interrelationship between, let's say, their community and the Jewish community. I would like to mention and to specify that the question here that is about is not about anti-Semitism only. It's when we speak about sub-Saharan Africa, we have to look at Judeophobia. We discussed that a lot with Shalem and Professor Coulibaly. What does that mean? Antisemitism is a word that we can get a meaning all over the world. We can move from Africa to Europe to North America and also to Asia and South America and see that and notice that there are forms of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is not related to Judeophobia, that, as we discussed again with other scholars, is what we can find in the sub-Saharan Africa. Judeophobia has to do with fear of the other. Who is the other? What is his culture? What is going to bring to my culture, to my community? What is going to change my community? This is the main important thing that we should look at when we think of sub-Saharan Africa and the Jewish community. Of course, there are other pieces, other way we can look at the relationship between the sub-Saharan Africa and the Jewish community, as well as Israel. There are international relationships, but international relations are based on common interests. It's the interests of you give and you receive. They're always the same, wherever the country comes from. It's the same when African countries have to vote for Islamist countries, a United Nations, or for Israel, or for France, or for America. So African countries in the sub-Saharan, sometimes they have common interests when they come to have a relationship with Israel. My work today, mainly, is related to my background. Why? Because when I started to study North America, scholars were surprised. And it's very important to notice that in Africa, you don't have scholars who are studying Jewish as a community or Jewish or Israel. There are exchanges between the states, but they are not specialists of Jewish studies in Africa. I was surprised to notice that Professor Shalem spent 10 years, 15 years in Israel, and also he used to study at the yeshiva, as well as the university. He used to use that yeshiva, and he speaks Hebrew very well. I was surprised. As someone who left Paris, we were friends, and decided to study in the United States, in order to go back maybe in my late years to start to teach Africans about North America. Professor Shalem influenced me that because there is a need in Africa of African scholars or Jewish scholars who can teach or who can do research on between the two communities, each community, but also the relationship between the two. It's very important. How do we exchange our culture? How do Africans from Sub-Saharan can learn about the Jewish community, and how also African can learn about Jewish community can learn about African culture. That is very important. That's why I decided to study North America. So, as my field of study is the United States and Canada, I decided to start with the 9/11. Why? As I noticed that the terrorist attack in the United States was related to the Islamic groups, one can understand that it was easy for me to question myself as a scholar. What are the causes of this attack in the United States? How can one interpret the acts that were perpetrated by terrorists here in the United States? What were the impact of those attacks in the United States as well as outside in Africa? Thank you very much. Why should we link the attack of the United States with the 9/11? And why are we mentioning anti-Semitism? Questions were very important in my sense. I look at Charles Small's thought and also his dissertation that I read when I was here. He was at Southern University when I came here, and he turned his dissertation into me. He discussed about anti-Semitism in Canada, in Montreal. And as I was looking at, I was trying to understand the relationship between African Americans, Hispanics, minorities in the city of New Haven. I understood something very important. When you look at other studies, such as anti-Semitism, anywhere in the world, that helps also to understand your own studies about all forms of prejudice. This is why I was very, 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 very impressed by his work. So, the second regard I had with was inspired by Dr. Ray. Dr. Ray was my advisor at Yale here, and William Falls. Dr. Ray wrote a book on city in New Haven, where he came up with why the city collapsed and how New Haven collapsed and brought all this form of prejudice that we see here in this country, in this city. That helped also to understand anti-Semitism. I connected that with Montreal and the studies of Charles Marx in Montreal. William Falls also was my scholar, he was my advisor here. He left, he's American, he left the United States and went to Africa in the 1960s. Why? He believed in that time that African countries, as they became free, can go on their own way. But he was disappointed back here. After decades, he told me that he was really disappointed. And he was disappointed that all of what was happening in Africa still happening here in the United States in the form of prejudice. So, bringing this Charles Marx, Canada, Montreal, anti-Semitism, my study of New Haven and prejudice in this city, study of scholars that I have to interact with, to deal with, that influence also my thoughts. That's why I found that to talk about things in Africa was very important. And the first thing I was really, really, really disappointed was that I didn't find information on such events. I want me to recall you the 9/11 attack again. September 11, 2001, Twin Tower collapsed, Pentagon hit it. Here in the United States, we were so surprised, we were in shock. As an African, I was wondering what will happen in the world. I called Africa, I spoke to my brothers and sisters and family. People were surprised and they were shocked. Why? People thought that that will happen also in Africa, so it was true. It was true. We'll come back to that. That attacks, as one can notice, was connected to anti-Semitism. I didn't think that when I saw all this record on TV. I was sleeping at that time. Someone called me. I don't know if you called me or someone called me. I woke up and I saw, as everybody, we saw the airplane hitting the towers and all the buildings. And my worry was, what will happen if they move up here in New Haven? What are we going to do? I didn't link this terrorist attack with anti-Semitism at first sight. I did not. But later on, in a few hours, George Bush came, the President George Bush came and he declared that we have to fight against terrorist attack and the new acts of evil. He mentioned Ben Laden at that time, that day. A few minutes later, I don't know if it was 30 minutes or 1 hour later, Ariel Sharon came out also. CNN, we were watching CNN at that time, and we had Sharon saying that there is also a new act of evil, which is Yasser Arafat, the chief of terrorists. As a scholar who did not think why we had a 9/11 attack and what was the link between this attack in the United States and anti-Semitism, I started to ask myself, what should we understand from these two speeches? I didn't have to wait too long. Since African presidents, they came out with a speech. My president of my native country, Cameroon, mentioned that the attack of terrorist group in Africa is related to also to 9/11. We had one missile that blew one airplane. I don't know if you remember that story in Kenya. That airplane was filled by Jewish people mainly. I think it was 81 or 85% of Jewish people. That attack took place in African soil. This is how I came to ask myself as a scholar, we have to see how we can understand what's happening in the United States and what's happening in Africa, what's happening to Jewish community, the Jewish people. This question, or this observation, pushed me to look at if you have any form of anti-Semitism that comes from Africans, African from sub-Saharan. It's important for me to mention that. Because, as you know, Libya and Muammar Gaddafi has a very strong power on African sub-Saharan countries' strategy. He's influencing Niger, Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast. He's everywhere in Africa. He gives weapons to rebels sometimes to fight, whatever. So Libya and North African countries, they have a specific interests that are related to the fight between Islamists and, let's say, Jewish. This is a religious also fight. Africans themselves, they're not part of the fight. I didn't find any African groups or African individuals who perpetrated an act of hatred to Jewish people. Maybe there may be. We discuss about that. We have to, as I said in my conclusion, we need scholars to study that. This will take years. As an African, I would like to finish my presentation by discussing what I think about anti-Semitism and racism. Racism in the sense of hate of someone because he belongs to one community or one race or color or whatever. In my sense, anti-Semitism is exercised in the context of a strong stigmatization and ostracism. That is part of the identification, of social identification of a Jewish. It's a phenomenon that we have to look at the individual dimension as well as the collective dimension. When we speak about anti-Semitism, we think at illegal exchange that characterize the way visible or non-visible people in relationship have to exchange. I perceive some obligation that implies the reject of the other. In French, we say négation. La négation, ou du moins l'indifférence, I think you will come with negation mainly. L'indifférence, we say in French, indifférence au consentement. That means the reject and at least indifference of consensus. Consentement will come with consensus. And for me, we cannot speak about anti-Semitism without mentioning marginalization. Anti-Semitism and racism, they are linked. Racism about Africans, racism about Hispanics, Asians, racism about people from different colors. I think we can separate forms of racism. Anti-Semitism is a form of racism, in my sense. That should not be accepted in this world. A group is marginalized since he is stigmatized for his identity, isolated, and generally excluded from the distribution of resources. I think the tools employed by the dominants are principally ideology that drive to consider others, some people as others. Marginalization is exercised mainly when certain characteristics of behaviors, of observable behaviors, are utilized by a small minority of people. That minority in the sense of minority as color, minority of people, small group. And when this small group drive the behavior to the rest of the society. If they influence the rest of society, then we can come up at speaking about marginalization. In my sense, American Indians, Native Americans, and these rebels from in India, Jewish out of Israel is very important. Jewish out of Israel. They cannot access resources that belongs to the institutions in the richest country, the western part of the world. Western countries block the access of resources of those groups. Although some people may come up with the fact that some Jewish have access to resources or institutional resources in the dominant countries, we have to denounce the reality. The reality is that even when they have access, they are still stigmatized as others. In my study, we can discuss, I can come with that in hours and hours. In my study of New Haven, community policing, the implementation of community policing in this city, I find it very interesting, I want to say topic, to study in the future. I noticed that Jewish were also hatred, not only in New Haven, in New York. I came up with the fact that we have to study, this is a little program that we have to focus on. And some people are not aware of that. So, I'm going to go. My definition of racism and antisemitism can take too long to discuss about. I feel my paper posted, and I hope Professor Small will let you get access to that paper. I would like to conclude, and I cannot speak about my definition of antisemitism and racism. Conclusion and my suggestion. Allow me to, please, to formulate or to come up with new research to be conducted as regards with this topic. I believe that there is no program, no department of African and Jewish culture in African universities. Very important. As a scholar, I think we should think of it. I also believe that, as the rabbi said, for instance, as the rabbi said to Shalem yesterday, I think you should, or you may teach the 7 law of Noah in African universities. I think that's very, very important. Mm-hmm. It's very important. And why I left France and Paris, decided to study North America, and why another African could not study the Jewish culture and African culture and teach, or the reverse. That are the new pace, new way we have to, new road we have to open. I want to warn you, this will take a lot of time. Research in that sense may take 1 generation. As a scholar, I took 10 years to do my book on New Haven politics. And we know that if we want to speak about the Jewish and African culture, we need at least one generation to train. In Africa, in Israel, here in America, wherever, and then we can come up with new things, new research scholars or academic who can help us further those thinkings. The researchers or students will focus at looking at the manifestation of anti-Semitism in Africa, here in the US, by Africans maybe, and the reverse also we learn. They are to look at the behaviors. They may conduct monography of people, of groups, of community, and various methods of study could be used in that sense. A scholar who wishes to do that, I want to warn him about certain things, of course. They will have to narrow the space of study. They have to define population, because when you study Tanzania and Kenya, it's not the same when you study Cameroon. Tanzania and Kenya is on the east part of Africa, they are close to the Middle East. Cameroon is in West Africa, it's not the same. But we have Muslims acting in north of Nigeria. Luckily not in north of Cameroon, not yet. They may also have to go on the field to conduct interviews. We have to build how to find sources, documents. We have to look at how they will be able to analyze books in that sense. There are problems, I want to warn you about the limits and the difficulty of conducting this. We have to look at the time they have to spend on that. The budget. It's very difficult now to conduct research without having enough resources. So I will finish here by thanking Professor Small for inviting me here to speak about this very, very, very important subject. And I hope we can further the discussion on my definition of anti-Semitism and racism that may take hours. I'm sorry here it wasn't, I wrote 17 pages, but it wasn't enough to come up with. So thank you very much.
Before Hubert sits down, not to ask questions on the content of what he had said, is there any points of information that you need to clarify? No? Okay, so we'll continue the discussion after Shalem gives his paper.
Shalom. Okay, the language is very important. And Albert Camus was saying that my language, the language I speak is my native land. So it's why I start with Hebrew. I won't be, my English, I'm sorry, this is Israeli, French, African, and Zulu English. So excuse me if I behave like the professor in a school to give you the right point I want to give. I have like 15 pages, but I make this. I summarize them. First of all, we'll start by the imagination of one situation. Imagine one moment, two persons. 1 year, 2 years, living together. Two neighbors living in the same city. The two persons witness the murder, the massacre of their parents by the same group of criminals. Imagine again that the criminals are being identified and they are known by everyone. let us go in with our imaginations. Imagine that before this criminal stand trial for their crimes, imagine that our two neighbors, two victims, two poor victims of the same criminal logic. Imagine that the two persons, two neighbors, two friends start fighting each another. Start fighting to know. First of all, the one who has suffered more. Secondly, the one who suffers more now. Thirdly, the one who's more victims. Imagine this situation. Then ask you a question. Now, the last imagination. Imagine that our two neighbors who are friends went from this victim race, from this verbal fight to a hatred phobia, even to a physical violence. 4 questions I ask you to ask to themselves. What can one think about these two neighbors? How one can qualify the behavior? Third, is the scene, the situation, surrealistic, unbelievable, or incredible? In philosophical world, every word has a signification, and my pronunciation don't give me, so I can write the word if you want. So, we are. If the situation is or surrealistic. And then, don't forget that we asked question before. The situation can be filled. If we say two neighbors, we can say is a Jew and an Indian. We can say is a Jew and African. We can say is an African and a Jew. It's an African and Indian and so on. But I won't take all this situation, the possible situation. I just want to focus on Jewish and African. Why? It's me. They call me Shalem. So I cannot fight for everyone, but I can fight for those who are close to me in order to help those who are not close to me. That's why I chose this subject, the response of Jewish facing antisemitism, racism, and especially the negation of the memory. Before going inside of my subject, I would like to give a kind of definition of memory, which is very important to follow what and how I want to make these Jewish and Africans come together and fight anti-Semitism. First of all, in philosophical way, people think that memory is only psychological things. But the definition I give is very close to Bergson, who was a philosopher. Memory is organic. Memory is linked to body. My definition is not that I am becoming a biologist, I'm not becoming a racist, saying that the memory is the body, is the blood of someone. No. Just I want to give another definitions to understand the situation of the son and the grandson of the survivor, of those who went through Shoah, or as known such or different kind of traumatic events. First of all, in my definition, we have memory like individual and collective. Secondly, memory like psychological element. Excuse me for abbreviation. It's psychology. And thirdly, memory can be defined like organic and belong to main cortex. So it means that it's inside of man. By taking this definition of body, memory as a part of the body, memory as organic and belonging to the main cortex, memory is transmitted by body to body. Okay? I am the son of a survivor. And in Israel, people are studying the consequences of Shoah on the son and the grandson. So if I'm a son and grandson of survivor, how can I have the trauma of my grandfather? So it means that the definition of memory as organic, as well as individual and collective, is very important to understand what I want to say. Secondly, memory, even I adopt the definitions of memory as body, but memory is transmitted by culture. We shall learn how to transmit memory, how to defend memory, how to teach to remember things. Memory as organic element is the link between ascendant to descendant. And the descendant represents or embodies the past and the future, as well as his own future, but the future of his grandfather. Because I'm Shalem, tomorrow my son Tamar will have another son and will take the name of a grandmother, Yael or someone else, and will continue the transmission of memory. But saying after this definition, one should return facing antisemitism, facing the negation of memory, one should return the last definition: memory is the man himself. I am my memory, and I am the memory of my parents, and I'm the son of my parents. After this definition, let us ask some question. What is negationism? Negationism is, in English, let's say, denier of memory. But technical word using by European intellectuals is negationism. Okay? What is the second part of my speech? What is negationism? That is the first question. And what is the practice of negationism? Here I will give different elements. Here I will give a general definition. The first definition. Negationism consists in denying the will of the Third Reich to destroy the Jewish people of Europe. Negationism consists of denying the existence and the use of gas chamber to do so. It means to destroy Jews of Europe. Negationism consists of denying the will Nazis to destroy systematically Jewish people everywhere they are. That's definition as a kind of practice. After focusing their will on Jewish people, the new antisemites and racists as a kind of practice. Before I give the 4 different practices, I think very important to know concerning the negation of memory, I would like to give 2 elements who belong to philosophical area. First of all, every kind of negationism has a kind of metaphysics. Every kind of negationism has a world view. An antisemite, a racist, a man who denied the Shoah is a man who behaves according to his worldview and according a kind of metaphysics. Metaphysics, that means the definition of being. Who is the other? Now let us give 4 or 5 practice of negationism. First of all, nowadays, my English is not good, so let me write so you understand what I want to say. If Jewish and African want to understand what they are going to face in next century, in this new century, they have to know the practice of those who are against their memory. First of all, in practice, a negationist denied systematically, affirmed the non-existence of Shoah. Or it can be of slave trade. The negationist will say, for example, the Shoah never exists. The Shoah is a narrative of Zionist or Jewish. That is the first act of negation. Then they deny the existence of gas chamber. Secondly, they say excess of memory. We are living in a globalization area. If I want pizza, just one call and I can have 1 billion or 2 billion of pizza in my house if I have money to pay. And people like to buy things today and tomorrow they throw it. We are rich, we can buy this car tomorrow, 2 years after we. And facing the memory, some people in Europe say that we Shoah, the memory of Shoah, the memory of slavery, the memory of colonization, too much. You speak too much about it. We fed up with your Shoah. We fed up with your slave trade. We fed up with your colonization. We fed up with you. Don't forget, memory is the man himself. So when they say we fed up with the memory, they say we fed up with you. Thirdly, they say it does no does not anymore sense. Make sense. It does not anymore make sense. Here, it's the practice of minimalization of the memory. Is the banalization, to take a word of Hannah Arendt, is the banalization of the memory. Here, what consists the practice? The practice consists by make comparison between memories. They will go to take the case of Rwanda to say that is a tragic event like a Shoah. But no, Rwanda is something that belongs to Africans themselves. But in the case of Shoah, it's facing two nations, two different people, and the will of someone to destroy another one. In the case of Rwanda, like in the case of in Western Europe, between the Balkans, it's a problem, internal problem. But in the practice of negationists, they will say, they will make a kind of banalization and say, sure, it doesn't make sense. We have Rwanda, we have Sudan, we have this. Oh, so sorry, I want to see a movie. That is the practice and that is the attitude. Finally, the negationists lead this kind of discourse, lead to the refusal of political responsibility, social solidarity with those who incarnate and embody the memory of those who have been killed by Nazis. The last element is axiology, the practice of axiology. It means evaluation of the memory. In axiology practice, we can underline two elements. First of all, is the transvaluation of memory. Secondly, is the inversion of identity. These are practiced. I will explain in what consists the transvaluation of memory. In philosophy, we have one last great philosopher of 19th century, a German one who is a good poet, Nietzsche, but he also a dangerous guy. But the word transvaluation is a good word. And those who deny the memory, those who work for the negation of memory, want a kind of transvaluation of the memory. In what consists transvaluation of memory? Transvaluation of memory consists of putting a positive sign on the crime against humanity by arguing that Shoah is a positive fact. Because after the Shoah, you Jews, you have a state. So we don't speak anymore about 6 million who has been killed. No, we have to speak about the state that comes after 6 million. That is the denying of the memory. I don't tell that they're still trying to fight and destroy this new state. But they say, you have a state. You are not anymore traveling with your language from place to place. Now you have a state. So say that Shoah is positive. Or they will say, and that is a quotation for a new research has been done by Vivorka. He's especially, I think that you will invite him. He's a great man, a man who makes serious work about the new antisemites in France, a good book, the result of many research. He quotes, the quotation some quotation of people living in Alsace. They say Hitler is not so bad. He didn't do so bad. Saying that, now you are a state. That is quotation. That's people today are speaking like this in Europe about Jews. So don't say that the Shoah has been a bad thing. But what about the parents of my family leaving us? What about our 6 million? One could have 1 children. And the children could have after 60 years. Okay? We don't speak about this. No. You are a state. Take your state. Concerning African, they will say, colonization is a positive thing. They can't. We build school, we build hospital for you, okay? That is the same, putting a science, plus, at the end, in the transvaluation of memory, bad and good are the same things. There is no more value. We are over, beyond the good and the bad. That is Nietzsche with. Concerning trade, they will say, no, we give you the means to save your soul. Now you can go to paradise. You don't know first the way to go to paradise. With slave trade, we save your soul. So now you can go to the paradise. Even you can speak French. So I speak French. So that is practice. And the last practice element, the inversion of identity. In what consists the inversion of identity? The inversion of identity is the extreme way to deny and to destroy the memory and the memory of those who died and the memory and the life of those who embody this memory. It means the son of the survivor. Okay? In practice, the inversion consists of inverting the culpability and the responsibility of the criminal on the victims and their descendants. How they proceed? Look at, I'm going in the street. Perhaps I look at the girl and smile to her. And they want to make me something bad. You have to justify yourself as the descendant of a survivor. That you are not guilty, that the criminal, the son of the criminal, has inherited the criminality of his father. So as a survivor or as the son of a survivor, you have to justify your life. Don't forget, memory is the man himself. Memory is individual and collective. In the inversion of identity, they accuse Jewish people to be responsible of the Shoah. They will say they were capo in the concentration camp. That is the case. You find many. If they were capo, so what? In the case of Africans, they will say, you know, the conquest of Africa has been done perhaps by 100 white soldiers, but they have an army, and the majority of the army were black. So who make the conquest? We are talking about world colonization. That is discourse that come by those who refuse and want to turn the responsibility and the culpability. One of the last elements that is adding here in the inversion of memory is to speak about the context. They will say we are now in globalization period. We are living in Judeo-Christian civilization. If it's Judeo-Christian civilization, it's your civilization. You belong to this identity. Your identity belongs to Judeo-Christian identity. Or your identity is Francophone. Even I speak French, you know that I'm English, you know that I'm English. I'm a French guy. So they can argue with civilization, political space, and say that, okay, it was my father who killed it was my grandfather who killed your grandfather, but don't forget that we belong to the same civilization. So the Shoah has been done by our civilization. So the hour is here to break, to deny, and to make confusion between victims and criminal. In this case, the last case, in the invasion of identity, you are the victim and their descendants are caught in a social and cultural habitus. Habitus is a social framework to show that there is many elements that people are living inside, and they are also producing the same element. So we are living in the same culture, in the same political space, so we are responsible for everything which has been done in this civilization. So why are you trying to defend or to speak every time about your memory? But saying all these things, there is something who can be held to the practice of negationism is now something that we think that it was over, but it's coming again with a new forms. My speech belongs in 3 elements. Negation of memory, antisemitism, and racism. Okay? This we already 10. I will finish in 10 minutes. We already speak about this. Now, in this global area, in this globalization, there is a kind of bizarre things that is coming. That is the rebirth of all diamond and myths. That means that we think that anti-Semitism is a new thing. But no. What to add to this practice of negation of memory, we have to know that Europe's all anti-Semitism and racism fashion is coming, but it's coming with new cloth and new discipline. Once it was the elite, European elite, that include priests, intellectual, like Drummond, like Maurras, were building the society and in order to exclude Jews. But this old anti-Semitism is coming. But it's coming and it has been married by new persons, including Africans, including Indians, who really have never seen Jews, but in Africa, not sub-Saharan Africa, but in some part of Africa, let's say the north, the south, and the eastern, the old anti-Semite and the new anti-Semite has its own discipline. And this anti-Semitism which is coming gives itself the face of progressist, on the name of human rights, on the name of equality, on the name of global area. Everyone has the right to be anti-Semite. Frankly anti-Semite, to say what you want to say. If I want to deny Jewish memory, I have the right of freedom and speech to say what I have to. That is the new form of anti-Semitism, which is also approved by Africans and by those other persons. Concerning Africans, the old fashion of racism, like the racism of Jules Ferry, Gambetta, are coming again. This kind of colonizer becomes nowadays arrogant, as the new anti-Semites are arrogant. In Paris, we all know, there is a new group of black people called themselves the tribe of Ka. At the television, I was in Africa teaching, and I never have television. So I was I was at the place of a friend to see a football match, but before the soccer, we see French news, and at the television there is a black who stand and say that, okay, at the Rue de Rosier, where there is many Jewish shops, okay, I'm anti-Semite and I support it and I defend it. If to fight the Jewish is to be the Jews who attack the black, if to fight them is to be anti-Semite, so I'm anti-Semite. But this kind of arrogant anti-Semite is coming with also the new discourse on colonization, which is also arrogant. So saying that anti-Semitism became a fashion in the sense of modernity, modo. Modo is fashion and also a problem of taste. If you consider the new anti-Semitism like a modo, a fashion, you have to think about an element, a person in the Bible, Nimrod. You all know the construction of Babylon, the Tower of Babylon. It was a problem of fashion, the cloth. Kind of cloth Nimrod wore and trying, on the name of gathering humanity, he was trying to kill God himself. And the new anti-Semitism, with its new disciple, the new racists, are also wearing the same cloth as Nimrod. On the name of human rights, on the name of all is a law, we can do what we want, we can do what we think as free person, as free individual. Our new nation, our new state, allow the racism, the exclusion, and also the will to kill. I have just two elements to finish, but 5 minutes, okay? The last two element is what could be the answer of Jewish and African? On what basis? On what basis African and Jew can be together and to find solution together? First of all, before giving my solution or my perspective, my view, I want just to come on the subject of anti-Semitism and Africa. Okay, just like a parenthesis. We are in globalization period. The form of anti-Semitism and racism are changing. The way of communicating between people and nations are changing. So we have to be careful. We don't have to remain in the former reflex or way of fighting those who want to destroy us. We have to be young in our way of thinking. Africa is the last developed country. Last continent, but with the new media, it's not the last to be informed. I stay in Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, that perhaps 1 million inhabitants. By internet, I go everywhere. I have information at the same moment, one event happened in New York, I can read it, I can follow everything. People are fighting, Jewish and African are fighting in Paris. I have it at my home at the same time like a French big guy. I have the French TV, I have everything. So we have to think and to change our way of seeing. So there is an antisemitism in Africa, let us build like Africa. The Africa I'm concerned with doesn't involve the Maghreb, which belong to Arab countries who are fighting against Israel, and they have part of my blood in Israel, so I cannot. So here it's obvious that there is anti-Semitism here, and there is anti-Zionism here, and if there is a possibility tomorrow to destroy Israel, they will do it. And there are black who are living here, and they suffer also about racism in Arab countries. I've never seen a black minister or director of a minister in Arab country. Okay? I've never seen a Jewish who is a prime minister in Arab country or deputy. But in Israel, there are Arabs, Palestinians, who are deputy and the right to vote and the right to say everything. So, I want to speak about this part of Africa, South Africa. I don't speak about Kenya. I'm speaking about West Africa and Central Africa. Here is the bad part, and people are more and very organized. They are going to have Union Africa, but West Africa is leading. West Africa is leading. So when I'm speaking about anti-Semitism in Africa, in South Africa it exists. Remember Durban 1, and we're going to have Durban 2. So here we have the way, the key we can fight or defend Africans to become anti-Semite or our brother to become racist. We have to do it. We have to use all the means. But in this part, do we have the anti-Semitism? I say no, not yet. But we have all forms of anti-Judaism, which come from monotheism, Islam, and Christianity. Okay? So, anti-Semitism cannot be, we cannot make separation between anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. We cannot make difference between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. But if we want to make the intellectual more or less action, you can say in sub-Saharan Africa, the anti-Semitism is coming. And what could be its face? Its face will be according what we have in France, what we have in England, what we have in America. So the coming anti-Semitism in this area will belong to the following elements. First of all, media, in English and French media. They have media, they are radio, they are television. So people catch this television and they have the news. So if tomorrow there is anti-Semitism, if you want to know the facts, you have to follow this media. Secondly, thanks to globalization, we'll have also anti-Semitism. Perhaps the first time they won't see the Jews, because if they see a Jewish in the street, they never say this is a Jew, so they don't know. But it's coming. The media of information and disinformation of former colonizators will help the coming of anti-Semitism in Africa, in this part of Africa. The monotheism, Christian monotheism, and Muslim monotheism with their anti-Judaism will bring, by theology and political theology of Islam, they will bring this kind of anti-Semitism. And let me say, that right now in Benin, that is one of my friends with whom we created the first association between Jewish and African in Paris in 1998, told me that the Iran people, Muslims, now they have mosques in Benin, and they are in Burkina Faso, Ouagadougou. They just now start helping people. Okay, they help. It's to help. And secondly, how the anti-Semitic will come in Africa, it will come from the influence of black or Afro diaspora, open Africans. And the last, which is not very interesting and to hear, is also there is many Africans who are living in Israel. They are illegal people. They don't have the right to stay there, and sometimes there are problems with police. And those, when they return, they can have a kind of resentment. Like in West Africa, many people now don't like French people. When in Africa the war started, they arrest 2 Israeli people. When they say we come from Israel, okay, let's go. But with French people, the game is another game. So that was the parenthesis. The last things. What are the solutions I'm going to give? There is solution. We have many solutions. First of all, I see 3 kind of solutions. Strong personalities. 2, cultural. 4, politics and economy. For the first thing, first element, we have, as Jews and Africans, to work with strong personalities, people well known in both nation communities, who as writer, as thinker, can make bridge between the 2 communities. Strong person who can support, discuss, and speak to another, and to fight inside themselves any kind of anti-Semitism. The second element, cultural. We all know that every time when Jewish and Africans start to work together, the face of the world changes. Remember in the 60s and 70s, when Jewish and African, the Rabbi Eshel, people are known, journalists in France, Daniel Morgan, they left France here with the Rabbi. They together with many people, Jewish associations, organizations. When they start working together, they can change the face of the world. That is real. So in the cultural part, we should remember people. Remember the actions, the behavior of the past, great past person. Okay? And the third element, the third one, excuse me, that one. The political element is what? To accept that, it's very hard to work between Jewish and the Africans. There is suspicion. Those in Paris, they say, oh, you have been sold to Jews. That's what they say. And Jews say, can we trust him? So there is suspicion. But we have those who believe that the relation between African and Jew can change. Those who believe and those who want it don't have to take into account suspicion. They have to work together. But the last element, it means that they have to, intellectuals, businessmen have to create associations in order to meet and to work together. And I'm sure if there is tomorrow anti-Semites African anti-Semitism, there will be the few. Even there will be fight by African men. If there is a Jew who want to play with the game of racism, we'll fight him, we'll help him to come back in the Judaism way of seeing human beings. Toda Rabba.
Thank you very much, both Shalem and Hubert. Any questions?